back to you with another session. Right now, we're going to be talking about this thing about money being the easiest part of this business. And the reality of the situation is there's a lot of people out there who do have money, but their money can do nothing for them if they don't have a place to park it. Everyone needs a deal to go ahead and put their money into. Many people put their money into the stock market, and there's people who don't want to put all their eggs in that basket, and they really would like to park their money in real estate in some fashion or another, but they need a deal, and that's where you come in. You bring the deal and you start to place it with the right money. I learned that the money is the easiest part of this business. It was not hard. As I shared with you, when I did my first deal, I approached that deal as a guy who was scared to death because I had no idea how I would get the money. But I immediately had a guy who wanted to buy it from me, so he was willing to put the money up and put some money in my pocket for finding it. I had a person who offered to partner with me. He didn't come through, but the reality of the situation is someone did come along and say, hey, I'll partner with you on that. The deal makes sense. I'll put the money up. And then finally, I had a guy lend me the money. He actually did lend me the money so that I could buy the house and then go ahead and renovate it and profit from it that way. I couldn't borrow anything, but this guy loaned me money at the time, and I'll talk about that and tell you why in just a moment. So many people have money, but they don't have a place to put it to work. And again, without the deal, no one works. The money doesn't work, the real estate agents don't work, the contractors don't work, so the deal is the key. The deal is the hardest part of the business, not the money. Getting the deal, everything else falls into place. When you find the right deal with the right numbers, everybody wants to be a part of it. But if you don't have a deal, it's a different story. So again, deal is the most important part. Stay focused on that, and I want you to understand that money is not hard. I'm going to take some time, and I'm going to probably go through this session a little bit slower just to help you to understand some of the things that I'm going to be explaining to you. But here's the deal. If the numbers work, the money is easy. If you have something under contract and you're going out there and you're trying to get the money and it's not coming, it's probably an indication that the numbers don't work. There's one of two things that's taking place. Either your numbers aren't as good as you think they are, or you're talking to the wrong people. I'm going to address both of those. You know, my first deal lesson, what I had learned, the guy wanted to buy it, other guy wanted to partner with me, but I want to share the story with you with the lender. You see, I waited till the very last minute. My deal was supposed to settle the next day when my friend told me he wasn't going to put the money up for it. He didn't have it at the time. And so I ended up getting on the phone with this lender who I'd never spoken to before in my life. And I said, hello, you don't know who I am, but I understand that you lend money on people's real estate deals. And he said, okay, yeah, I do. You know, I don't know who you are either, but, you know, tell me a little bit about yourself. And I said, well, I found this house that, you know, I got it under contract, and I want to borrow the money so that I can do the deal. So he started asking me some questions. And he said, so how long have you been doing this? I said, I'm just getting started. He said, how many rehabs have you done? I said, I've never done one before. He said, what's your credit like? I said, it's not very good. He said, what do you do for a living? I said, this. He asked me how much money I had to put into the deal. I said, none. I gave this guy no reason in the world to lend me the money. While I was on the phone with him, I heard him typing in the background. And I can only suspect that what he was doing was looking up the value of this property. He was doing something to try to gauge what was this property worth. And he told me, he said, who's doing the settlement? And I told him who the title company was, and he said, I'll give you a call back in a few minutes. So he called me back in a few minutes. He said, all right, I have no idea why I'm doing this, but I'll have a check at the title company tomorrow so that you can do that deal. And I was blown away. I gave the guy no reason in the world to lend me the money. My credit was no good. I was honest with him about that. I didn't mince words. I didn't have any experience. I didn't have any money to put into the deal. There was only one thing about the whole thing that made sense, and it was I had a good deal. And he was typing up, looking up, doing some research on the property that I had put under contract, and came to realize that his worst case scenario was that I paid him on time. You see, the best case scenario for him was that I defaulted he gets to take the property back and make the money that I should have made. His worst case scenario was that I pay him as agreed. Now, I got to tell you, as a lender myself, we don't want the best case. I'm not interested in foreclosing on people. I mean, really my best case is you just pay me, and I'm happy with that. I want to see you successful. And he wasn't hoping for my failure in that. He really wanted me to be successful with it as well. But when you can understand that the worst case scenario is that the person pays as agreed when the deal is right, then hopefully you can understand why money is the easiest part of the business. The deal is the hard part. You get the right deal and the money will come. The lender's worst case scenario, if they are doing it the right way, is that you pay them on time. And for a lender, their best case should be that you don't pay them. And then they get to make the money that you were supposed to make. So this should change your mindset when you understand this. Getting the good deal, the money will come. So what you believe is what you're going to get. If you believe that money is hard, it's going to be difficult for you. You need to get over that. You need to realize that as long as I'm out there and I am securing a good deal, the money will be there, and it always will. So I'm going to ask you just to think about this for just a moment. And typically, I would do this in a room with a whole bunch of people to prove my point. If I'm sitting in front of a room and there's 100 people in this room, there's always people in that room who think that money is the hardest part of the business. They think that they can't get money to do a deal. And so I go ahead and I just bring up some scenarios. Sometimes I could use a real life scenario, but for right now I'm just going to use a hypothetical situation. Let's just say that I have a house that has a $200,000 after repair value, and I'm able to purchase it for $160,000, and it needs $20,000 in rehab. Well, if I'm standing in front of a room of 100 people and I ask them, how many of you would be willing to put up the money for me to purchase this house, I'm not going to get too many people who are willing to put up the money to buy this home. There's a very little spread in this, and anybody who knows anything about this business, that $20,000 spread can get eaten up real quickly. If I am looking to flip this and I'm using a real estate agent, by the time I pay closing costs and commissions, there's no profit in this deal, and nobody wants to participate in this one. They're not going to raise their hand and say, yes, I want to be a part of that deal. Now, if I stand out in front of the room and I present them with a different deal, same house, $200,000 after repair value, same neighborhood, perhaps I'm buying this one for $100,000 and it needs $30,000 in rehab. If I now poll the room and I ask how many of you would be interested in participating in this deal one way or another, maybe you want to buy this house from me for $110,000, or maybe you want to put up the money and partner with me on it, or perhaps you want to lend me the money so that I can do this deal. If I ask the room how many of you would be interested in participating in this deal underneath one of those circumstances, one way or the other, the majority of the hands in the room are going to go up. Almost all the hands are going to go up. I will specifically poll that room and say, how many of you with money, who actually have money, would lend the money for me to do this deal? And there will always be hands that will go up because this is a good deal. And so you see, when you have a house where that you're buying it for $100,000, it's worth $200,000 after it's fixed up, it only needs $30,000 in repairs, the person who puts up the $130,000 for me is very, very secure. If I don't do what I'm supposed to do with that, they can take the house away from me and make the spread that I was supposed to make. And so I want you to understand, when you are trying to get money, if you're finding it difficult, chances are your numbers don't work. When you have a deal and the numbers work, the money will come. Now, I want to throw out one more scenario for you. Let's say it's the same neighborhood, and now I picked up a house for $60,000, and it needs $50,000 in rehab. It needs a lot more work than the first two did, but I'm now buying this for $60,000. It only needs $50,000 in rehab. I am going to have people beating down my door to be a part of this deal. I'm going to have to pick and choose who I want to work with. I'm going to have people in the room walking up to me and saying, Steve, I will give you $90,000 for the house. You can make $30,000 off of it right now, and you don't have to do anything to it. I'll buy the house from you. and they're still going to have a very profitable deal by giving me $90,000 to get into it. And so the numbers are everything. When you have the right numbers, money comes from out of the woodworks. People will want to participate. They're going to do everything they can to be a part of your deal. So I want to now take a different scenario. Let's say that you want to purchase this home and you're able to go to the bank and you want to go and get the money from the bank. You are bankable. They're willing to put the money up, but you don't have the down payment. And so when you sit here and let's just say we're buying this house for $100,000, it's still the same $200,000 house that you need to pick up. In fact, I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to change it. Let's say I am buying the house for $200,000 and I need 20% down. I'm going to need $40,000 to give to the bank so that I can purchase this home, or $40,000 that I have to put down in order to make this deal happen. If I tell somebody, if you put up the $40,000 and you can have 10% of my projected profits of $30,000, they're going to get $3,000 out of this deal for putting up $40,000. How many people do you think would be interested in that? There won't be too many. Not too many people are going to be willing to put up $40,000 to make $3,000. Sure, it's not a bad return if we're talking CDs and things like that in the bank. It's actually a pretty decent return if you get your money back within a year or so. But the majority of people are going to hold on to their $40,000 and look for a better opportunity if this is the game that they're in. But if I told them, if you put your $40,000 down payment down and I'm going to give you half of my profits, you'll get half of my $30,000 profit. You'll make $15,000 return on your $40,000. Now we got a different story here. A lot of people are going to be willing to put their $40,000 up and take the risk to help me get my deal done in return for making a $15,000 profit. Of course, by doing this, it means that I make less. I don't make the full $30,000. I'm leaving some of my profits on the table, but that's okay. When you're getting started in this business, sometimes when you don't have everything that you need to give up something in order to get what it is you want so that you can get moving. The reality is, if I can get somebody to put up the down payment for me, I am now able to go to the bank, get this money, get a deal done that makes $30,000. Half of it's going to go to the person who put up the money, and the other half of it's going to go to me. So I make $15,000 on the deal. Had I not gotten that money, the $40,000 from the other investor, I would have nothing. I would make nothing on this deal. So this is a good deal all the way around. Getting half of the profit is better than nothing. Keep that in mind. This is part of the attitude that you have to have. So sometimes if you are having a hard time finding the money and you are talking to the right people, you need to understand that most likely your numbers don't work. The key here is right people. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. You want to get referrals and get in front of the right people. You know, I always make a joke that, you know, if you are walking into the convenience store and asking the cashier at the convenience store if they know of anybody who will put up the money for you to buy the house, you're not going to get anywhere. You're talking to the wrong people. But you need to put yourself in the pathways of people who know people with money. Now, one of the top referral sources that you can possibly be working with is the title company. You see, the title company is the one who's doing all these transactions. They're processing all the paperwork. They're doing the deeds. They're doing the mortgages. They're recording them. They're doing the payoffs for when a mortgage does get paid off. The title companies know who the players are. They know who's putting the money up. Now, most title companies can't just sit there and start giving you the names of people and giving you their clients. However, you can walk on in and say, hey, listen, if I were to bring in a good enough deal, would you happen to know of anybody that might be willing to put the money up to help me make that deal happen? And the title companies are going to always know of people. Whether or not they just give you the person's name or number, it's up in the air, but they might just give you their name and number and say, yeah, I know a guy, he's always looking for new things. Here, give him a call. Or they might refer your deal to the person. They'll call up the lender and say, hey, I got somebody in here who wants to know if you'd be willing to work with him. I didn't want to give out your number, but I wanted to pass their name along. But more often than not, and this has happened to me quite often, is that when you ask that question of the title company, the person who's running the title company might say, well, you know what? If the deal is good enough, I might be the one who will put the money up. So bring something in and let me know. I can share a story with you. I was the first person who I ever officially mentored. He had asked me to mentor him, and I was really, really hesitant. He lived in another state. He lived in Ohio, but he kept on saying, Steve, you're the guy. I want to be mentored by you. And I finally agreed to do it. And part of my mentoring arrangement with him was to go on out to Columbus, Ohio, where he lived, and to spend some time with him and to help him out in one of the certain areas. But one of the things that he kept on telling me was, Steve, we don't have lenders here the way that you do. There aren't any lenders in my market. And I said, you know, that's not true. There are lenders everywhere. There's people who are doing this all of the time. But he kept insisting that I was wrong and that Baltimore was a different market. And we had tons of people willing to do this. So I go on out there, and I'm spending a day with him. And I happened to show up the day that they did have a Real Estate Investor Association meeting. We were meeting with his real estate agent. We were meeting with his attorney. And he was taking me around and showing me some of the things that he was doing. Well, while I'm out there, the first meeting that we have is with his attorney. And so we're talking, and I'm just trying to help lay the groundwork for the things that he wants to do and trying to get his attorney on board. And so one of the last questions that I asked his attorney before walking out was, if he happens to come on in here with the deal where the numbers make sense, would you know of anybody that might be interested in lending him the money to do the deal? And it was just a simple question. And the attorney went and raised his hand. And he said, I would be willing to lend the money. And as we were walking out of the door, he said, I'll get you started out with up to $150,000. So if you find something right, you know, I'll put the money up. It was that simple. All I did was ask one person, and I had him a lender. He didn't ask. And so it just took simply asking, but asking the right person. This was a real estate attorney. They know where the money is. Later on, we're at the RIA meeting. I happened to know one guy at the RIA meeting. I'd never met him before face to face, but I knew of him from an online real estate investing forum. Knew the name. He saw me walk in, saw my name on the name tag, and we started connected, and we just started talking. And he asked me what I was doing in Columbus, Ohio. And so I sat there and I told him I was out here mentoring my friend and helping him get started in the business. And I said, well, you know, one of the things that he's been challenged with is finding somebody who will put up the money for his deals. If he happened to have the right deal, do you know anybody that might be willing to fund him? And this guy did the exact same thing as the attorney did. He raised his hand. He said, I'm always looking for deals to fund. If you get the right deal, give me a call. I asked 2 people on that trip, and I had 2 lenders. He didn't ask anybody. He wasn't asking the right people. And so I want to encourage you that when you're putting yourself out into the right circles, there's plenty of people out there who are willing and able to fund these deals. You can't go and talk to your coworkers, you know, who don't have anything. Sometimes your coworkers do. Sometimes your coworkers have 401ks, or they've inherited money that they might put to work, but most of the time they don't even know that this is an option for them. And so sometimes it can take a little bit of educating. Some of the kinds of language that you should use when you're around people and when you're talking are, you know, instead of soliciting people for money or asking people, just say, you know, I've been sitting here, I've been flipping houses, and I'll tell you, my private investors, they really love me. They're making a great return on their money. You know, instead of keeping their money in the stock market, they're making 12%, 13%. You know, they're getting much higher returns, and it's really safe. And, you know, my only issue is that I don't have enough private investors. I wish I had more private investors. And, you know, you just sort of say that like passing. And I've had discussions like that with people, and I've had other people overhearing those conversations, and they pull me aside and they say, I was listening in on your conversation, and I heard that I can potentially make some really good returns by putting some of my money to work with you. I'm always looking for a place, or I have a bunch of money on the sidelines that I would like to put to work. Can we work together? And that has happened to me multiple times. One time I was sitting in a coffee shop, and I was sitting down talking to a friend of mine, and he was asking me how I did things. And as I sat there telling him the story, before I left that coffee shop, I had a woman come up to me, and she gave me her card, and she said, I would really like to talk to you. I overheard your conversation. I have quite a bit of money that I need to figure out what to do with it, and I would love to have further conversations with you. Now, at first, I wasn't making much of this because this is where you got to be really careful about judging people. I thought the lady was homeless. I thought that she didn't have much. She really looked unkempt and everything, but I didn't call her. I go back to the coffee shop, and she's in there again. And she said to me, she said, "Can we sit down and talk?" And so that time I just sat down and I talked to her. And she told me she had $4.5 million that she wanted to put to work. And so she overheard a conversation where I was just talking about the high returns that my private investors make, and now she wanted a piece of that action. She wanted to get in on that. Ultimately, I never did work with her because I had more money available to me than what I needed. I will tell you this, that in my first year of going out and asking those questions and just constantly asking people, would you happen to know of anybody that might be interested in putting up the money? It was within the first year or two, I had a list of 25 different lenders, 25 people who had money that they were willing to put into my transactions. I only ever used about 2 or 3 of them, and I never had to go back and look for anybody else again, because the people who I was working with, I had great relationships with, and they had more money than I could spend. And so you don't have to have a lot of them. That's another fallacy. Many people think that they need a ton of money, and the reality is most people only need a few $100,000 to fund their entire business. Not too many people need to go much above that, but certainly to get started out, you only need to get your foot in the door, and once you've proven yourself, people tend to step up and give you more. So there's all different types of lenders. There's the small local banks, community banks, credit unions that are right there in your community. There are private lenders. Private lenders tend to be, private individuals, and I refer to private individuals and private individual hard money lenders. I'll get a little bit more into it. Almost one and the same. There's institutional and private, but I'll talk about that in just a moment. And then there's the institutional lenders who do conforming loans. Now, for the purposes of this discussion, the things that we want to focus on the most is going to be your small local community banks and the private individuals. These are the 2 things that most anybody, if you've got these in your back pocket, you have all you need. You don't need the big banks because they're not going to do your business anyway. You don't need to get institutional hard money lenders because they're going to treat you like a bank but charge you 3 times the rates. The private person and the small local community bank, when you get those 2 on your team, you'll have everything you need. So I shared with you earlier about how you might have to give up parts of your deal in order to make things happen. This is very real. In order to get people or compel people to participate in your deals, there needs to be something in it for them. And you may need to be willing to give something up. Sometimes it might mean that when you get that great deal, you just wholesale it to somebody else, make your payday, and let them run with it. That's not a bad option. I've watched people many times say, well, no, I don't want to wholesale. I want to do this deal. And they watch the deals fall apart because while they were maybe able to find money, the people didn't feel comfortable giving them the money. They were willing to buy the house, but they didn't want to be the lender. If you'll sell it to me, I'll put the money up, you make your money, and then you walk away from it. But if you're telling me that the only way you want to do this is for me to be the lender, I'm not interested. You don't have experience as a rehabber. I don't want to take that chance or whatever it might be. This one is too big of a rehab. I'm not comfortable with giving you the money to do it. You might just have to bend, take the money that you can. It's all about getting the deal done, getting these deals to closing. You don't want to gripe about interest rates. These loans are such short term that, I had a guy one time wanted to buy a house from me, and I told him he had to use my lender. My lender was charging 15% interest, and the guy said, I will never pay a nickel over 7.5%. Well, when you're in and out of a house in only 4 months, and you're talking about a $40,000 purchase price, we're talking about very, very small amount of interest. $2,000 in interest versus $1,000 in interest. This guy was going to gripe about, I'm not paying $2,000 or 15% to this guy, and instead he missed out on a $15,000 payday because he was worried about letting the lender make an extra $1,000. And so you got to be careful about that. When you can understand that these are short-term in nature, sometimes there's a reason why the lender has to charge something, because it's not worth their while to go through all the time of doing due diligence and paperwork for something that they would normally only collect 3 or 4 months interest on. So they need to get paid for that up front too. I pass on a lot of loans that are too short in duration, regardless of, that I want a sort of a fixed amount that, gosh, in order for me to even look at this, I need to know that I'm going to make at least $2,500. And if it's a small loan and you want to negotiate the interest and you only want to pay me $1,000, I'm not even going to sit down and evaluate your deal and consider it to make that little. So you may have to give up something to get people who have money. They value their time. They want to put their money to work, but their time is also worth something, and it takes time to put a deal together. So just keep that in mind. You might have to give up a piece of your deal. Don't get wrapped up. It's the accessibility to the money that helps you to get deals done. I also want to encourage you with this. As you are getting referrals, don't just burn through lenders. I had a guy one time who was telling me, Steve, none of the banks in my area do what you do, or what your banks do for you. And I got a list of 20 banks, and I went and I called them all up yesterday afternoon, and every one of them told me no. Well, first of all, for me, I couldn't have a conversation with 20 banks in one afternoon. He was doing something wrong. He was clearly doing something wrong. You don't want to burn through your lenders. Instead, you want to take the time to talk to them. You want to ask them questions. You also have to get to the right person in the bank. So when I say small community banks, in almost every instance, you're going to be speaking with a vice president and maybe even the president of the bank. It's that small. They want your business. They can also form or mold their loan programs to fit you. You don't always have to fit them. See, the problem with the big banks is they're conforming. You have to conform to them. The small local banks have a lot more flexibility. They do loans within the community. They exist to help fund things within the community, and they're more interested in figuring out a way to work with you than not work with you. The big banks, you either fit or they're moving on. And so in most cases, you'll never fit. They just don't do what we do. So the small local bank is where you want to be. You're going to be speaking to somebody pretty high up in the bank. Now, keep this in mind. This might sound a little crazy to you, but when you do go into these banks and you're a single family home real estate investor, you are not on the residential side of their business. You're on the commercial side. You want to speak to the commercial lender. That might not make sense to you because you're not buying a commercial property, but you are a commercial account. And so if you are speaking with the residential mortgage person at that bank, you could be speaking to the wrong person. And I got to tell you, they're not always, they're usually very, very friendly, but they're not always sharp enough to pick up on what it is that you're asking for to refer you to the right person in the bank. So sometimes you have to do your own due diligence and figure out who the right person is in the bank that you need to speak to. And it's going to be the person in charge of commercial lending. You are a commercial account, and they will still do loans on residential real estate, but because you are a commercial account, that's the side of the bank that you want to be on. And again, they're going to be very high up. They're going to be the vice president of lending or potentially even the president of the bank. Very rarely are you going to be speaking to a lower end, and I don't want to say lower end, but someone lower on the totem pole type of employee within the bank. That is not the person or the right type of bank. These banks that will work with you, these community style banks, sometimes they're going to have only one branch. They might have a few, they might have 3, 4, or 5 branches, but they're not big banks that are covering the whole region, where they've got ATM machines on every corner and stuff. That's not the person who you're looking for. These are smaller banks. They don't have that many things and that many assets, but they keep all their loans in-house, which is what gives them the flexibility to be able to give you the types of loans that you need. So when you walk into these banks, you want to start asking them questions. You want to tell them what it is that you do. I purchase homes, I rehab houses, and sell them for profits. Or I'm a landlord and I buy and I hold. And be really clear, and then ask them, what types of programs do you have available for someone like me? And listen to them. Here's the first thing that most bankers want to do. Every time somebody comes in, they want to interview you. They want to start asking you questions like, so what do you do for a living? How much money you make? What do your tax returns look like last year? They want to get into this discussion and focus on, are you a good candidate for us to be working with? When I want to encourage you to take control of those conversations and you start interviewing them. If they say, well, how long have you been doing this? Say, well, this is something I'm just getting started with, but let me ask you, do you work with, all types of investors? Turn it around. You take control of the conversation. You start asking the questions, and you just continuously keep on asking them questions and say, well, tell me, what kinds of programs do you have for people who rehab houses? They're typically going to be focused on a construction loan type of product. Almost every bank understands what a construction loan is for building a new house. They modify that product for you to buy a fixer-upper, fix it up, and get it sold. So you're going to be dealing with construction loans. And ask them, tell me about your construction loan product. How does it work? If they say, well, you're just getting started out, and we really just look for people who have a lot of experience, you want to say, well, so tell me, what does the product look like for the experienced investor? You want to just keep on asking them questions because, one, you're going to learn from it, but more importantly, you can walk into a lot of these small local banks and have nothing going for you. Your credit could be shot, you could have no income, you could have no experience, and there's a way that oftentimes you can even get the small local banks to deal with you. If you just accept them saying no right out of the gate and you walk out, which is what this guy did when he burned through all of these banks in an afternoon. He just called them all up, said, I have really bad credit and I was wondering, I want to start flipping houses. I was wondering if you would lend me the money. Well, no, we wouldn't be interested in that. Okay, hangs up, calls the next bank. And if you're going to have conversations like that, you're basically saying, don't lend to me. I don't want to do business with you. But if you take the time and maybe you could start asking them questions, they say, until you get your credit straightened out, we're not really going to be interested in it. And say, well, is there any way that you would be willing to work with me? What if I were to bring in somebody who was stronger than I am? Would you consider it then? What if you loaned me less money and made me bring in a bigger down payment? Would you loan me the money then? One of the goals that you're trying to do is, through asking all these questions, is eventually get the bank to the point where they say yes. At some point or another, the deal makes sense to them. You have to keep in mind, like I was saying, finding the deal is what's important. If you can walk into a bank with the right deal, at some point or another, it's a no-brainer even for them. And if you can get them to that point, what would it take to get you to say yes to me? I'm buying this house for $100,000. Would you lend me $30,000 if I got $70,000 to put down? There's almost no bank in the world that would say no to that deal. They'll say yes all day long to something like that. You don't have to get that radical, but I'm just trying to make a point. Get them to the point where they say yes. Gather that information from them so that you can have a more intelligent conversation with them later. The next bank that you talk to, you take your lessons learned from the first one and you incorporate that into your discussion with the next lender. They have the flexibility to mold and tailor their programs. They can do things a little bit different for each one of their customers. They don't always like to do that, but they have the ability to be able to do that. So to focus on getting them to the point where they say yes is a really important thing for you. Ask them, if you were to lower the LTV, you need to know your lender lingo. You need to know what LTV is, loan to value, and ARV is after repair value. You need to know these different things when you go in and you talk to them. Don't learn it from them. Do some research, learn some of the lender lingo before you walk in and you start having these discussions. So focus on continuously asking them questions. Learn about their program. Ask them things. If they say, hey, we do 80% down, or I'm sorry, we do an 80% loan, you have to put 20% down. You ask them, can I borrow that 20% or do I have to have that money in my account? Most of the time, their preference is that you would have the money in the account. But there's times when they'd say, well, we really don't care where it comes from. Or we're okay with you borrowing it, or if you brought in somebody else to put up the money, we don't really source it, we don't look for where it came from. You want to know how they approach that, because this is going to be important as we get further into the discussion as to how you would structure some of your deals. So again, I just want to have all of you keep this in mind. Go in, have the discussions with the bank, learn. You're going to learn by asking questions. Take control of those conversations by asking questions. If you're constantly asking them questions, they don't have the time to necessarily interview you. You might not mind them interviewing you, but when it turns into that kind of meeting, you don't learn as much as you'd hope to learn. At some point or another, when is it important for them to know you? When you've decided whether or not you want to borrow from them. They don't need to know your whole picture until you learn about them. You know, I would walk on in and they would start asking me things, and I'd say, okay, you know, with all due respect, that's not that important right now. What I need to know is, can your bank do what I need? And if you can, then, you know, we can go through the rest of that. I can share my tax returns and I can do all of that with you. But the first thing that I need to find out is this a good fit? They're trying to figure out if it's a good fit, but it's more important that I find out what they can do before I disclose any of that other information to them. So keep that in mind. Go in, be willing to have these conversations, ask a lot of questions. Don't schedule more than one banker meeting in a day. Learn from the one, go back, process everything that you learn so that you can be better prepared when you go into the next bank, perhaps a day or two later. And take your time with doing them. You don't want to just burn through all of them. Now we're going to talk a little bit about deal structuring. Deal structuring is a really important part of the business. I learned a lot about finance, and I'll just tell you the way that I started learning about finance was one of the paths that I started out in the business with was trying to flip notes. I was learning all about the finance or note business, and consequently the note business is really just sort of the banking business. They do the exact same thing as the banks do. I learned all the lingo dealing with notes, but I wanted to flip notes. I'm going to take a long story and make it very short for you. I went out and did all the things that I was supposed to do, trying to find notes to buy. And going back 20 years ago, you know, there were notes and it was happening and people were brokering notes here or there, but it was rather rare. I found that it was a whole lot easier for me to get a good deal on a house than it was for me to even find the note that somebody would sell. And so I started just buying houses and creating notes and then flipping those notes. And I went through that for a period, and I did quite a bit of that, where I was buying the house, selling it on a note, creating the note in such a way that I would be able to sell it, and pooling those notes together and then flipping them. So I learned a lot about the finance side of the business going through that. I also learned how to structure deals. And this was probably one thing that gave me a leg up on a lot of people. Many people can understand, hey, the real estate side, and they can understand values and how to evaluate things and how to do their due diligence. But knowing how to take that deal and then actually pulling the money and the right money and putting it all together was one of the things that made a difference for me. You want to learn the lingo, learn all of the different terms as far as financing is concerned. Learning to structure deals is important, whether you're buying property or selling property. Making sure that you're using the right type of financing to pull off a deal. I had shared that when I started, you know, my first couple years in the business, after having done 105 deals, I went back and I reevaluated those deals, and I wanted to know what worked and what wasn't working. Not everything I did worked. Some of it was a struggle, and I went back and I evaluated, why was it a struggle? Why did some deals go really well and make me good money, and other deals I worked really hard, and the ones I worked the hardest on, I didn't make much money at all. And so I wanted to sort of take the path of least resistance. But what I discovered, the number one thing that I discovered, the deals that were the hardest, the ones that made me the least money, was when somebody was using the wrong lender. They didn't have the right lender in the transaction, and the lender made that transaction a nightmare for us. And so I came to realize that my most profitable deals was when someone was using a lender that I had a relationship with, and I knew that that lender would fund these deals. I knew that they would come through every time. I understood their financing. I knew exactly what they were looking for, but when it was some mystery lender, those lenders tend to botch up the deal, make us jump through a whole lot more hoops, make me spend more money, make me reduce my profits, and I just didn't want anything to do with that anymore. So the problem was that we were dealing with the wrong lenders, and so I learned to start structuring things properly, lining up the right person with the right property with the right lender, and getting my deals done every time. And that was a big turnaround for me in my business. So you need to know who all the players are. Get to know it. You're not going to know all of this stuff out of the gate, but constantly, as you are going about your day and you're building up your business and you're interacting with more people, always ask, hey, would you happen to know of anybody that might be interested in putting money up if I come across a great deal? Ask that of real estate agents. Ask that of other investors. Ask that of your accountants. Ask that of title companies. Ask that of attorneys. They're the ones who know the people. They know the players. Get to know them yourself. And over the course of a couple of years, you're going to no doubtedly put together a Rolodex of people who actually have the resources to help you make your deals happen. So get to know them. Know what the lender requirements are. Again, in the small local banks, there is some flexibility, but even with private investors, while there should be some flexibility, the one guy who I dealt with the most throughout my career had very little flexibility, if any. He treated it like a business. Everybody knew exactly where you stood in dealing with him. He would fund every deal you brought to him, provided it met the criteria. As long as you knew his criteria and you brought it to him, he would put up the money. He didn't care what your credit was. He didn't care what your experience was. It was 100% asset-based lending. If you didn't pay him, he didn't care. He was going to take the house and then sell it for more. So, know what your lender's requirements are, because in order for you to structure deals properly, you need to know what a lender will do. This is a sort of an extreme example, but if somebody is trying to buy an apartment building, let's say a 100-unit apartment building, and maybe you're the one who has that apartment building, you're trying to flip it, and the person who is coming to you to buy it says, well, I'm going to use the person who just funded the mortgage on my house for me a couple of months ago. I really like them, so I'm going to get the money from them to buy the apartment building. They're barking up the wrong tree. That is not the person who would fund a 100-unit apartment building. And so you need to understand that. And you might need to ask some questions. You want to know who the players are. If you're going to be participating in that type of building, you need to know where can your buyers go to actually get the money to pull that deal off. And then it's your job to try to line that property up with the right lender who can pull it off, and then bring the right person into that picture who wants to now be the purchaser using your lender to buy your property. And so this is really important to understand deal structuring. The person who does single-family homes is not going to pull off the 100-unit apartment building for you. You need to go to the commercial lender, not the residential lender. You also don't want somebody to say, hey, my friend's willing to help me with this. Okay, well, what kind of resources does your friend have? You're now talking about a $6 or $10 million apartment building. Your friend's got $100,000. I mean, no. How do you plan on getting this deal done? I have learned in my career that most of the time, as I'm doing this, my buyers don't know where to go. I usually am the one who has had to refer them to the right lenders. I've had to take them to people. In fact, so many of my deals, and once I started learning this, I would check in with the lenders ahead of time and said, hey, would you be interested in funding this deal if I can find the buyer for it? And I would specifically ask the lender, would you be interested in this deal? And they would tell me yes or no. If they said no, I'd go through those questions. Well, why? What would it take for you to be interested in this deal? And then find out. And then I would just sort of like try to put the puzzle pieces together. Now I have a lender who said they would do it under these circumstances. I have the property, and now I'm trying to find the right person to put that last puzzle piece in to make this whole deal come together. And so deal structuring and putting the pieces together is really important. And when you learn how to do that, you can become very profitable. If you don't understand this part of the business and have a thorough understanding of it, sometimes it's just like gambling. You're going to put a property up for sale and cross your fingers and hope that everybody else knows what they're doing. Sometimes that works out. You don't have to know too much. I shared with you earlier that you need to pick something and you need to focus on it. If you're going to focus on doing single family home flips, you really only need 1 or 2 good sources. You're going to be dealing with the same programs over and over and over again as long as you keep on doing those same types of deals. You don't have to learn too much. The more you expand the types of things that you're going to be doing, the more people you need to bring into the picture. The more puzzle pieces there are, the more you're going to have to work to make sure this is structured properly to get this thing to the settlement table. So you want to learn what the different lenders out there are offering. So just to reiterate, you want to link the right money with the right property with the right properties. Now, sometimes I refer to it as the 3 Ps. You want to link the proceeds with the people with the property. You put those 3 Ps together like a puzzle and you get them done the right way, you can make deals happen. I have watched so many deals fall apart because people didn't do this part of the business right. This is the most critical thing, especially when you're dealing with bigger deals. When you get into those bigger deals, you need to make sure that you are dealing with the right lenders, dealing with people who the lenders want to deal with, and bringing the right property that fits the lender's idea of what they want to have in their portfolio. And you put those puzzle pieces together and deals start to happen. So the small local banks, they're non-conforming. They have a lot of flexibility. You could even hear from them and they could say, okay, yes, this is what we want. And then you can come on in and propose something different, and they may consider it. As an example, here's one thing that I want you to understand. I had a small local bank that I was working with pretty early in my career. In fact, the bank approached me when they heard everything that I was doing, and they wanted to start funding some of my deals. Well, even early in my career, it was still not easy for me to come up with the down payments to fund all of these deals, and they required a down payment. It was something that was necessary. So if I was buying a house for $50,000 and they would lend me 80%, I want you to just keep this in mind, and I'll go slow through this. That means they would lend me $40,000 on my $50,000 purchase price. Let's say that this house was worth $100,000 after it was fixed up, and it needed $20,000 in rehab. Take your time and write this down. I'll go slow. A $100,000 house that I'm buying for 50, and it needs 20 in rehab. Altogether, I need $70,000 to pull this deal off. But the bank is telling me that we will only lend you 80%. So on the front end, they're only going to lend me $40,000. They will also lend me my repair money up to $100,000, which is the value of the house after it's fixed up. So they'll lend 80% of the 100. So keep these two numbers in mind. They'll lend me $40,000, which is 80% of my 50 when I'm purchasing it, and they will lend me a total of $80,000 for fixing it and rehabbing it. So there's a total of $80,000 that they will give me. So I need 50 and 20. I need 70, they're willing to put up 80. So I could go to someone and say, can you lend me the $10,000 down payment that I need? Remember, they're going to give me 40, I need another 10, so I need $50,000 so that I can purchase this here at the time of settlement. Maybe I have the $10,000, but I don't want to keep my money wrapped up there. But one way or another, I'm going to get my $10,000 so that I can show up at the settlement table. The bank brings 40, I bring 10, $50,000, I now own the house. I now have a rehab to do. At the time of negotiating my loan with the bank, I need $20,000. I don't tell them I need 20, I tell them I need 30. I could get as much as $40,000 from them because they're willing to go up to 80% of the 100. Total $80,000 loan, they've only put $40,000 out so far for the purchase. There's another $40,000 that they would be willing to lend in order for me to pull that off. But if I ask for only 30, not only am I getting the 20 that I need to actually rehab it, but I'm also getting the $10,000 back that we put down. And for the bank, that is still a safe loan. $80,000 on a $100,000 house is their total threshold. I'm only getting 70 from them. I'm getting 40,000 at the time of purchase and $30,000 for rehab. I'm borrowing a total of $70,000 from them. I can recoup my $10,000 if I use my own money, or pay back somebody that $10,000 if they put the money up for me, and I'm into this house 100% using the bank's money. If you can understand the way banks work and structure your deals properly, you can begin to start doing these deals with little to no money out of your own pocket. I was right up front with the banks. They knew exactly what I was doing, and they had no problem with it, because at the end of the day, it was still falling within their threshold. It was less than where they wanted to be. In their mind, it was a safe loan. That's what they were looking for. And as long as they were staying within their threshold, they were okay with me getting the down payment from somebody else. But that down payment did have to be at the settlement table. They couldn't just give me 100% at that time, but they could give me 80% and let me get my money back on the back end when we were doing the rehab. So this is really, really important. Learning how to do this, it will help make things a whole lot better. So here is the typical small bank loan. I just sat here and I gave you a scenario where the banks will give an 80% LTV renovation loan. Sometimes they'll call this a construction loan. They will lend 80% of your purchase price at the time of settlement, and they will lend 100% of your renovation cost. The total, the absolute total of your loan can't exceed 80% of the ARV. So in the example that I gave you, the after repair value is $100,000. The maximum loan that they could give me is $80,000, or 80% of that 100. And that is to be a combination of my purchase price and my rehab. So they will sometimes consider rolling your closing costs into the loan, and they can be flexible with credit. So I want you to keep these things in mind. I had a bank that would actually even take my payments and escrow them. My deals were good enough that they would just set some money aside and I wouldn't have to make payments. I literally would walk into the bank, give them a contract for a house that I was purchasing along with a draw schedule. They would prepare everything. I would buy the house. My contractor would get paid. I'd sell the house. I'd pick up my check, and I would never write a single check out during that whole process, because the bank funded everything. All I was the guy who brought the deal to the table. The contractor fixed it up, the real estate agent sold it, and I picked up the checks. So when you can learn to structure these the right way, this can come together pretty easily for you. So hard money lenders. Hard money lenders are people who are known to be more of an asset lender. They make a high return. Their risk is in the asset. They are not as concerned about credit. They're not as concerned about your income or what you do for a living. They're really only concerned about the house. This is the typical hard money lender. There are what I refer to as institutional hard money lenders. There's private people, which is an individual person who just happens to have a lot of money. They're the easier ones to work with. The institutional hard money lenders, I don't care too much to send people down those paths. They're people who are getting money from other people and they're lending it. As a result of dealing with somebody else's money, they have to have full-blown underwriting criteria that, frankly, if you can qualify for many of them, you can walk right into any bank and the small local bank and get the money. I would much rather see you going to a small local bank and getting your money at half the price, who's going to be more flexible with you, than dealing with the institutional hard money lender who has all the same underwriting criteria but is charging you 2 to 3 times more. I know that might sound like it goes against what I shared with you earlier, but one of the reasons why we would pay higher rates to a hard money lender is to not have that many hoops to jump through. If they're going to make you jump through all of the hoops, you might as well go to the bank and jump through the same hoops and get the money for a lot less. So I want to just encourage you, the types of hard money lenders, when you hear me talking, that I'm referring to are private people. And those private people can be anywhere from charging you as low as 6 or 8%, and in the industry they tend to refer to them as private investors. Hard money charges more, but as long as they're private or individual people, I'll refer to them all as private. And some of them can be as high as 15-3 or 16-6. And when I say that, 16% in 6 points or 15% in 3 points. I've seen all over the board. I think that's getting a little bit crazy. When you get up to that 16-6, it's really hard for the investor to make money. The only one making money in that transaction sometimes is the lender. I try to get you to avoid that. But you know, some fair rates, 13% interest and 2 points, or 12% interest and 3 points, is a very common thing. 10% interest and 2 or 3 points is pretty common these days, and you know, that is not a bad place to be. If you're doing your deals, you're getting in and out of them quickly, the accessibility of the money, the not having too many hoops to jump through is the key to helping you out in that area. That doesn't mean that your lender shouldn't do their due diligence in order to keep you from jumping through hoops, but they need to do their due diligence to protect them. Having said that, I'm going to throw one other thing out there. Some of you might know family members who have money. Just because they're a family member doesn't mean you should treat them differently than you would any other lender. In fact, I think you need to be more careful dealing with your family and their money. I would always encourage you that if you are going to borrow from a family member, do a note and mortgage the same way as you would with anybody else. Make sure their interest is protected. Pay them just like you would be expected to pay somebody else. Don't treat your family members any differently. I have watched the things blow up all the time, and the expectations of some beginning investors are that their families will fund them, and they're burning their families. It's not worth it. You know, treat your family just like you would anyone else and pay them off, make payments to them just like you would anybody else. Don't expect them to give you favorable treatment just because you're a family member. Treat them the same way you would anyone else, and guard yourself. If you can avoid borrowing from family, try to avoid it. So, typical terms, I shared that with you already. Combining financing. This is where, you know, it gets interesting. I already shared with you, if the bank will let you borrow your down payment, you're going to maybe be borrowing your down payment from a private lender. And they're going to be putting it up for a pretty short-term period, knowing that the moment you start your rehab and the bank starts giving you money for your rehab, you're overfunding your rehab so that you can pay back the private lender who put up your down payment money. And you know, those types of things, when you can combine financing. People, when they get into the apartment building or large office buildings and start doing much larger projects, they're always going out and raising money, potentially borrowing the down payment. To buy a $10 million building, they might need $2 or $2.5 million to put down to make that deal happen. And if you don't have it, they're out there borrowing it. They're looking for investors, and those investors are taking a piece of the action to put up the down payment. Once that down payment's in place, then the bank is willing to participate. You need to learn how to start combining financing and bringing together the private and the banking world so that you can start to pull off deals that you otherwise would not be able to do by yourself. So pulling off big deals, again, I just shared with you, this is the way it's done. They refer to them as syndications and things like that. You go off, you get a whole bunch of people, and then you find that commercial lender. They all understand this. This is the way most of those deals happen. You go off, raise money from a bunch of different places, bring together the banker or the commercial lender, and then the whole deal comes together. When you package deals the right way and focus on not just bringing the financing together, but if you're looking to be a flipper and you want to sell some of these things, you want to package it in such a way that you get it sold. You want people to understand that, hey, all of the terms are here. I used to do everything I could because I knew that, especially beginning investors, one thing that was important to them was they wanted to do deals with no money down. I figured out every way that I could package a deal or structure a deal to where my buyers could get in with no money. So for instance, when it came to going to the bank, I would teach my buyers that if you can just come up with the money to get into this house, I can get you your money back pretty quickly so that you're into it for no money. Or my hard money lender, he will lend 100%. However, if he comes up short, let's say I'm going to make $5,000 on a property, but my hard money lender is coming up $2,000 short. I'll tell them I'll take back a second mortgage of $2,000. So I would only make $3,000 at the time of settlement, but I would get a second mortgage for $2,000 to make sure that they got in with no money down. I didn't take all of my profit at one time. I left some of it on the table and I financed the rest of it, because by offering my deals with no money down, I had people lining up to buy these properties from me. So structuring them and packaging them in such a way to get them sold really was a big benefit to me. And I had buyers just lined up, constantly calling me, looking to see if I had something else, because I made it easy for them to play in this game called real estate investing. So when you can bring everybody together, the money, the property, the people, bring them all together, you can profit dearly in this business. And so I want to encourage you, this isn't 100% necessary, but you will be a better investor for it. Take the time to get to know the finance side of the business. The more you know about it, the better of an investor that you will be. So again, I want to just throw this out there. Money is the easiest part of the business. I hope that as I went through some of this, that you can begin to see that and you can understand that if you're of the mindset that money is hard, it's going to be hard for you. You're going to respond in such a way that money doesn't come to you. It's not, you're not attracting it. But when you can get the right deal and piece it together with the right people, money is easy. Money is not hard. Banks want to lend money. Private people want a place to park their money that is safe and is going to make them a good return. Other investors have money that they want to buy your houses if you have the right deals. There's plenty of people out there, if you can find the deal, they're willing to partner with you. The money is the easy part. It all focuses on the deal. So don't have that mindset anymore that money is the hard part. Don't think that you can't get started in this business because you don't have money. If you can find the deal, you can get started in this business. This is Steve Cook with Lifeonaire, wrapping up this session. Join me again in one of the next ones.